The special ingredient in today's dishes is determination. I spent 2 hours grinding down the urad dal and the rice to get the full medieval pre-blender experience to make our dosa batter. We'll see if it pays off. Food is arguably the most important resource in Age of Empires 2, but all we see in game is just a single set of numbers. Throughout this series, we will be diving in to see exactly what foods each civilization prepared and ate, and how well I can recreate them. This is Meals of Empires. Trying to cover all of the cuisines of southern India in one episode is a very ambitious task, but in Age of Empires 2, the Dravidians are used to represent all of the Dravidian language-speaking people. So that includes the people speaking Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam, which are the four most common languages in South India. And this lumping of cultures isn't ideal, but before the Dynasties of India expansion in 2022, all of India was just one civilization in Age of Empires 2. So at least now I can focus on the foods that are found in southern India specifically, which include things like coconut and mango, and we'll get to all of those different ingredients and spices in a moment. Today's recipes include rasam, a coconut chutney, a curry, dosa, and its very closely related cousin uttapam, and as well as some mango pickles that I wasn't brave enough to try make myself, but I will be trying later with our judge Abby. A lot of the cuisine from India as we know it today is actually very similar to what was present in medieval times, and southern India was more of an area that had a lot of spices that were being traded out, such as, I guess we'll get to that in a trivia question later. For now, let's get started with the cooking. So we're going to start by preparing all of our ingredients. Red onions are the more typical onion found in India, and I tried to look up where red versus white onions originate, and there's not much information. It's before history was really being recorded as far as I can tell. But these red onions are much smaller than what you'd find in the United States. Here's a yellow onion for a size comparison, and you can see these red onions are almost more in the shallot shape, where they're a little bit more elongated. But the red onions in the United States are much more pungent, so using a red onion from the US isn't really going to give you the same flavors as what you would have in Indian cooking. There was mixed advice online if you're in the US and you couldn't find these types of red onions. Some people were saying just use shallots instead, and some people were saying just use whatever onion you can have. 2 of these are going in the coconut chutney. 1 is going into the curry, and 1 is going to be garnishing the top of the uttapam that we're going to be cooking later. For the garnish, I'm thinking slices, and for everything else, I'm thinking diced up pretty thinly. The 4 main empires that were around during the medieval period in southern India, starting in the 6th to 8th century, we have the Chalukyas, and from that empire comes Lokopakara, which was a 10th century cookbook. It is present on a link that I'll include in the description of the YouTube video on peppertrail.com. There's a great English explanation of what's present in that cookbook, as well as a bunch of other cookbooks from the period. Following that dynasty, we had the Rashtrakuta dynasty from the 8th to 10th centuries. Some of the Dravidian peoples that were vying against the Bengali Palas and the Gujara Pratiharas for supremacy in the so-called Kanauj Triangle around the Gangetic Plains. Then we have the Chola Empire from the 9th to the 13th centuries. They are overlapping because South India is a fairly large place, and there was actually multiple Chola empires, not just the one during the medieval period, but also the Chola empires in the antiquity period and also after the Age of Exploration. And then in the late medieval period, you have the Vijayanagara Empire. So the ginger here is primarily for the uttapam, and we'll put that aside for now. In a lot of Indian cooking, you will of course have chili peppers that are being used, and those would have been post-Columbian exchange. And instead, during this series, we're going to be using our green peppers, which would have originated from South India along the Malabar coast. So we're not going to use too much, maybe, I don't know what you call that, a pinch. And these are pretty easy to grind up since they're all dried up. They have a slightly fruitier flavor than what we would have in terms of black pepper in our pepper mill. When we did the Gujaras in northwestern India, we used sesame oil for a lot of the foods, but now we're going to be using coconut oil since we're along the south, closer to the tropics along the coast. And for the rasam, we have tamarind, cumin, black pepper, turmeric, mustard seeds, curry leaves, and jaggery. That is one thing that I do want to grind up a bit, is these mustard seeds. And these are brown mustard seeds. We also have black and white mustard, but they grind up very, very easily. I guess we'll start with a little bit of everything. We'll add in some of our curry leaves. We'll add in some of our mustard seeds. We're going to add in a good deal of black pepper. This is also known as black pepper rasam. The word for curry leaves actually comes from the Tamil word curry, or kari, K-A-R-I is the way it's written in English or in Latin scripts. But the word comes from the meaning blackened, as in the leaves looked darker than any other leaf around, I guess. We'll add some cumin. That should be good. We'll add a touch of turmeric. Add a bit of salt. So I said I'm going to add about 400 milliliters, so 1.5 cups of water in here. This is concentrate tamarind that we're using, and I'm going to start with just 1 spoonful and go from there. It's supposed to be a sour soup, but I don't want it to be like overpowering in any single regard with all the different ingredients that we've added. That's pretty good so far. But I think I could use more tamarind, so I'm not really tasting it right now. There we go. That's the good stuff. I think it's where it's supposed to be. The only difference is here versus a modern version is we didn't put any tomatoes, and you can also put tur dal, which is pigeon peas, into that as well. But that's also more common in sambar, which is another version of this soup. They both have the tamarind as a souring agent. So we're going to call that good for this. And I'm going to switch it over to a container since we're going to need the pot again. No? Does it smell like popcorn?
Yes.
It does kind of smell like popcorn. I don't know why. So the winter melon showed up with the Burmese earlier in the series, but we're going to be reusing it here, and it makes a little bit more sense to have with South Indian cooking in comparison to Burmese cooking. I believe for the Burmese, it was a replacement for snake gourd since I wasn't able to get access to it. So we're going to remove the outer peel and we're going to remove the inner section because we want a consistent texture in our curry. We don't want to have some of these hard inner ribs messing with the texture as we're eating. There are quite a few different gourds that are used in Indian cooking, between bottle gourds and winter melons like this. And sometimes they're called pumpkins as well, which can be a bit confusing since, as we've mentioned in the series, pumpkins all originate from the Americas. At least everything that I conventionally would call a pumpkin. This kind of reminds me of a watermelon, just without the sweetness, which makes sense. All right, before I finish this last little bit, we can start on our curry and getting some of those ingredients started. We'll put our coconut oil in there. There we go, it's sizzling away very nicely. Adding a bit of garlic. Get those curry leaves covered in oil so they start frying up a bit. First trivia question, while the ingredients are warming up, what green fruit is occasionally used as a replacement for tamarind as a souring agent in South Indian foods? Not kiwi, definitely a green fruit, and it does have that, like a little bit of a sour taste. Amchur is the powder from green unripe mangoes. So typically we're just eating mangoes when they're ripe, when they've turned like a little bit red or a little bit yellow. But green unripe mangoes are peeled off the outer skin, thinly sliced, dried out in the sun, and they kind of turn a color almost similar to like a ginger slice. And then they're ground up, and what you have is just like this powder that's, it smells a little bit sour, not very much of mango. But it's very reminiscent. Like if you walked into a Indian supermarket or something, this is a smell that you would pick up almost instantly, at least for me. And I like adding it to the end of my chana masalas when I make that. But that's not South Indian cooking, and definitely not from the medieval period. Now I could cook this with coconut milk or with water. I think I'm going to do this one with water because I'm worried that the oils in the coconut milk would cover up the spices that we're going to be using later in the tempering. But I will add a bit more salt now as well. And we'll add a few cups of water just to kind of cover everything up. I have this coconut that I was planning to use for the khmer. I do have a backup plan, but I am going to try to open the coconut first. I'll use a knife. Let's see if I can get into one of the eyes without hurting myself. I don't have like a good surface. I think I'm going to have to use the ground. Here's my wrench. Oh, that worked. All right. Oh, it's dripping. There we go. I never thought I would be washing a wrench in the kitchen sink and putting it on the dish rack, but so be it. For our coconut chutney, we're just going to be mixing all of the ingredients together in a bowl and then just quickly cooking it in some coconut oil. So yeah, I'm just going to try to make a crosshatch and get in there. I can definitely smell the coconut flavors now. It's quite nice. Definitely harder than like getting a kiwi open. Hopefully having fresh coconut will really make those flavors extra special. I would say we have half a coconut here. So I'm going to add the rest of the red onions to this. We're going to crush up some more mustard seeds. I think that looks like enough. I don't want the cumin flavors to be very forward. They're just going to be in the background there. Take a handful of the curry leaves. And there is our spoonful of tamarind. Jaggery is simply less refined sugar. I find it has a nicer taste. So even outside of this series, I'm using jaggery for more and more baked goods when I am adding extra sugar. That's like a teaspoon and a half, I'd say. Don't want it to be too sweet. It's not supposed to be like a sweet chutney in my mind. It's just to have something interesting for the dosa to be dipped in. All the ingredients are going in for our coconut chutney. We're only cooking this for like 2 to 5 minutes. We're gonna use cumin, cinnamon, asafoetida, and mustard seeds for our tempering. So tempering is the process of like adding more flavor back in at the end of the dish. I can smell the onions predominantly in here. I'm worried the coconut might be a little bit hidden. The sweetness is very interesting in here. It almost kind of reminds me of alcohol. All right, that little pot in the back will be for our tempering. We'll heat it up. We need to add some more coconut oil in there. The alternative oil that would be used in a lot of South Indian cooking would be ghee. All kinds of dairy products, including buttermilk and ghee and yogurt, were very common. So in my left hand, we have kaneel, aka cinnamon in Dutch. And I mean, the color looks pretty similar to this kaneel, which is from Ceylon, from Sri Lanka. This is supposed to be the higher quality stuff, whereas this is what you just find pretty much everywhere. It's almost a softer taste in the Ceylon cinnamon. This is supposed to be a higher quality, a little bit better for you, though the differences aren't like major. But I'm going to try using the Ceylon cinnamon. Cinnamon was one of those spices that was well traded out of southern India and Sri Lanka. We have our Ceylon cinnamon, we have our mustard seeds, and we have our cumin. And the last ingredient we're going to be tempering with is asafoetida. It's coming here just as called yellow powder. And it's predominantly, when I look at the ingredients, it says rice flour 72%, gum arabic 19%, asafoetida 7%, turmeric 1%. I guess the turmeric is what's giving that yellow color. Asafoetida is also known as devil's dung because it has a very strong smell. And the key for asafoetida is you do need to cook it or fry it a bit in some oil. Put that in there. Let's put our tempering into both dishes a little bit. There we go. I have 1 or 2 more items that I need to do here. Along with our dish, we're going to have a medium grain rice. I don't have any of the common rice varieties that would be found in southern India, so I'm going with another medium grain rice. It's just Egyptian type rice. A significant part of any South Indian recipe or meal will be the dosa or uttapam. I spent 2 hours earlier grinding this all up by hand. So part of this is Our urad dal, about a fourth of this is the urad dal or urid dal. This is also called black gram. What we have here is the split version. I talked about split versus whole dals or legumes in the Gurjara episode, but the split variety just cooks a lot faster. So far, these have been soaked overnight. They were ground up earlier today, and then they've been left to ferment. It's not like a bread fermenting where we see like a lot of bubbles. I think it could have happened, but because we're in the middle of the winter here in the Netherlands, I did have them in the oven to heat up, but I don't think we got much fermentation out of this, probably a little bit. Before we start the dosa and the uttapam, we can do the second trivia question. Name 2 ingredients that are somewhat common in modern Southern Indian cuisine, but would not have been available in the medieval period. So Janissary had 2 great answers of tomatoes and chilies. I had potatoes, tomatoes, and chilies, all of them originating in America and all showing up in some form in Southern Indian cuisine. Potatoes are often used as a filling for modern dosa. There's many different varieties of dosa, so potatoes are used as a filling of one of those varieties. Tomatoes are included in modern rasam, so in our rasam we didn't have any tomatoes, and we also didn't have any chili peppers, which, as you can imagine, are found throughout Indian cooking in so many different forms. You have green chilies, you have cayenne pepper powder. I mean, throughout South Asia and Southeast Asia, you just find peppers just about everywhere, but all of those would have come post-medieval period. I don't really want oil on the pan. That's why I'm using a cheap Teflon pan. So there's our lucky Amsterdam mug. I'm gonna start with very little. I'm gonna pour it in the middle like a pancake, and then spread it around somewhat evenly, hopefully. So I'm just using the bottom of the mug and kind of hovering it over the top, letting it jump and bump along the edges of our coarsely ground ingredients. And we'll give it a test. Oh my goodness. Did it actually work? You might be able to see the little bits that aren't completely ground up. And we'll see what kind of texture they will have, as well as some fenugreek seeds. So this isn't too dissimilar from the methi templa that we made for the Gujaras. The templa being the flatbread, methi being the, I think, Hindi name for fenugreek seeds. And fenugreek seeds have a bit of a maple syrup flavor to them. The compound that's in maple syrup and fenugreek is the same. It's found both in the seeds and in the leaves of fenugreek. So next up, we're going to make the uttapam. I'm going to put half of my fillings. So we're going to start with the onions. Modern versions of the uttapam include tomatoes fairly often, occasionally corn, some green chilies. I'm going to put some sliced ginger, or I should say grated and sliced ginger. I'm going to put some of our green peppercorn powder that we ground up earlier. So that should have a wild arrangement of flavors. And then I have a mix of poppy and sesame seeds to scatter on as well. Now the question is, can I flip this without all the ingredients flying off? Hopefully they're kind of stuck to the dough while it was still wet, the batter, but I'm not getting a good purchase here. Oh, this is hard. I almost want to flip it old style. You know what I mean? There we go. Bit of a mess, but it worked. So we'll try the next uttapam using a little bit more batter this time. I want to say these are like pancake thick, so not as thin as the dosa that I'm going to make next. That'll be the last item to make. All right, while that's going, we can do our third trivia question. What was the most prized ingredient exported from southern India? So yeah, Janissary is correct again. It is black pepper. Black pepper was traded from where it grew along the southwestern coast of India, aka the Malabar coast, up to the Red Sea. From there it was spread by Muslim traders. Pepper remains a very popular spice. You know, when you get 2 shakers, you get your salt shaker and you get your pepper shaker. I guess the reason for that is because pepper always adds something, but it doesn't overtake any of the ingredients. And we did add quite a bit of it to our rasam, so I'm interested to see how that comes out, if it's going to be overbearing or not. And we might as well do the fourth trivia question right now as well. What were the main sources of alcohol for the medieval Dravidians? So the people who spoke Dravidian languages. There's quite a few. One of the earliest collections of poems, called Purananuru, written in ancient Tamil text on palm leaves, gives us insight into the foods, drinks, and customs that were present in South Indian cuisine. Alcohol was likely more regularly drunk in medieval times than in modern times, And these sources were produced by fermenting palm tree sap, legumes like the urad dal that we have here, rice, or sugarcane. I mean, sugarcane, plenty of sugar, plenty of sugars to make alcohol. One of the wines that shows up regularly in these poems is called tori. It's a palm wine, and oftentimes it was associated with sailors that were traveling, trading the commodities like pepper or like cinnamon. And I don't have any to try today, but I'll definitely look out for it in the future. Time for the part that really requires a lot of experience. And when I went and got the asafoetida powder at my local Indian grocer, he was asking me what I was going to make. And I said, just some sort of South Indian food. And he's like, oh, like dosa? He's like, but you need some experience with dosa. And then he asked me if I was a chef. And I said, no, I'm just a home cook. And a lot of the time, it gets rolled up into some interesting shapes. And I don't know if I have the skill required. There we go. I guess I can try the mango pickles while the dosa's ending. So 70% mango, 14% sunflower oil, not available in the medieval period. Salt, mustard grains, and then acidifier corrections, fenugreek, turmeric, cumin, coriander, and a little bit of asafoetida. It's really salty. Really, really salty. Which makes sense, right? You want a brine. But you definitely have to have that as like a side with something else, because just eating it straight out of the jar, I don't think people are going to do that unless they're very low on electrolytes. I guess that's the end for the dosa. I'll try to roll it up as best I can. It's very hot. It seems to want to tear. It's stuck. Ow. It doesn't want to keep going. There we go. It's kind of rolled and kind of torn. We'll call that good. All right, here's our professional taste tester, Miss Abigail.
I'm not getting paid, so I'm not a professional.
You're right. Unprofessional taste tester. Amateur. We'll start from over here. We have our Rasam. It's a broth that's very sour. It has tamarind, and it has a lot of pepper. And it has curry leaves, which are the other parts that are floating in here. Here we have our dosa, which is almost like our flatbread with a coconut and onion chutney. Here we have, similar to the dosa, but a little bit thicker, is our uttapam, and it's almost served as, or like made like a pizza, where we have all of our ingredients spread on top of it. We have onions, poppy seeds, sesame seeds, green peppercorn, ginger, and garlic on there. And then in the middle, we have our main course. We have our rice in the middle. We have our curry that's not coconut based for once. This is our winter gourd, our giant cucumber you saw earlier. We have, again, the same coconut chutney. And at the top, we have our mango pickles that are very salty. And the dosa can be like ripped apart, and you can use it as like a dipping bread, or you can just eat it separately first just to make sure it's edible.
It's interesting. It's good.
Mm-hmm. And there is, yeah, your uttapam. I will say, in comparison to last week when we had the khmer, where we had a lot of aromatics that we were smelling, but few of the flavors were actually reaching our tongue. This is all the spices right in your face right from the start. And so I understand, yeah, rice can help douse some of those extreme flavors.
I can actually tolerate eating.
Yeah. It's not an affront to your senses. Yeah, you might mix it up.
Make a little burrito.
I don't know about burrito, banana leaf burrito, but you could go for it. I'm not going to stop you. Right. Execution score, I will say that the dosa, I should have added some oil on when it was cooking, and you think more salt as well. Do you want to go with your standard 8, or do you feel like...
I was going to say 8.5.
8.5, okay.
Is 8 really my standard?
Yes. 8 is like, yeah, sure, it's good.
It looks good. Looks fine.
Yeah.
You cooked everything well, it seems like.
The presentation's there. It's just lacking some salt. And should you serve this to your girlfriends? I mean, there's some things you don't want to...
What's my standard for this one?
I don't think you have one. It varies quite a lot.
4.
4? Okay. There's things here that are just like too strong. I think you'd want me to make the curry with a different ingredient that was less gelatinous.
You're calling this curry?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not curry.
It's not like your typical Thai curry, but as far as like the definition of the broad categorization of a curry, I think that would fall into. I'm going to taste everything real quick and then give my verdict on what I'm thinking of flavors and taste. The poppy is a little bit too strong, I think, for what I'm going for here. Then the green pepper hits me. The onion's a little bit weaker than I want. I want it a little bit sweeter here. What else do I have? Oh, the ginger doesn't come through very much at all. And the garlic is kind of there, but it's overshadowed by the green peppercorn because there's a lot of overlap there in the flavors. The flavors have actually, died down quite a bit. When I tasted it earlier, the broth tasted more flavorful. Or the winter melon did a good job of pulling up a lot of the flavors. But I think, I don't know. Maybe I needed to temper it with a few more ingredients. All the asafoetida powder that we had seems to have ended up in the chutney and not in the our curry. And if you saw how much I used, it was just like a little sprinkle. And now our rasam, which is our broth to finish everything off. This is the best, I think. It's warm, it's rich. It shows you why pepper is such a common spice around the world, because it just adds a little bit extra. And it goes with so many different dishes. Next week will be the Chinese. If India was all included into one cuisine, that would be difficult. Having all of China included into one cuisine is also equally difficult. I'm going to have to include some elephants. I'm going to have to include some elephants from northern and southern China just to get a whole idea of the entire cuisine. It's just, there's plenty of information out there. It's just going to be difficult because the cuisine varies from region to region. So I'll somehow try to get a whole meal out of the different cuisines that are found in China. Until then, I'll see you in the comments.